Welcome to Keep It, Cricket Media's show about pop culture and politics and what happens when they smack into each other at an alarming speed. I'm your host, Ira Madison III, I'm a television writer and Fall Out Boy fan.
I'm Louis Fertel, I'm a TV writer and Jane Fonda historian.
And I'm Aida Osman, I'm a TV writer and alleged comedian.
Let's get into it.
Our guest today made the terror of the last presidential administration a little more tolerable. As one of the only news media personalities willing to use the word racist to describe a racist, he made cable news bearable, and now he is not only an anchor, but an author. Please welcome the author of This Is the Fire, CNN's Don Lemon.
Hi, guys. I'm so excited to be here. Like this is fun for me to do, except you're probably going to get me in trouble and eat me up, and then I'll be, having to apologize for something I said. Let's do it.
I just want to say there's a first superficial layer to this when, seeing a news anchor in casual Friday attire, I already feel like I'm so shocked. I truly forget you guys have real lives. Do you feel like people are casually intimidated by you when they meet you?
No, I think people aren't casually intimidated. They're stunned usually because they're used to seeing us, either we're at a, red CNN jacket and we're blowing in the wind. It's like, oh, look out the wind. Or they're used to seeing us with a face full of makeup and lighting and a necktie and jacket. And so it's so out of context when people see you at the pet store or, you're getting a pizza at 2 a.m. after having too many beers. And they're like, wait a minute, you look like the guy on CNN. It's like, yeah, I am. Oh, no, everybody come over here. Look, it's the guy who's Don Lemon. So they're usually not terrified because I think when you're on someone's television, when you're on the little screen, it's like you're in your home, so you're part of their family. Yes. So I think people had the reaction to movie stars who are on the big screen.
Plus, we've seen you lit on New Year's. So
hey, I almost said, "Hey, girl, hey." Of course. I mean, but listen, I'm having a good time on New Year's Eve, but there is a little bit of Dean Martin in there, where you're just like, hey, everybody, I'm having a great time. And so you're not quite as lit as everybody thinks. This is water, by the way, so don't get the wrong impression.
Topo Chico.
By the way, casually best. Pretty good Dean Martin impression, too. You had the facial expressions.
Oh, yeah, you get into it. So, you have a couple glasses of wine or you have a beer or a cocktail and you get into it. And it's fun, because I find that even when people when there's a bit of sort of going along with the crowd when you're drinking. I think most people are not. You can tell when someone is really hammered, and then you're like, okay, it's time for you to go home. Or if you're just kind of going along, because everybody's ready to party usually when they're drinking. Well, but anyway, the moral of my story is this is not really casual for me. This is kind of like you throw a jacket on. Casual for me is like a white or a black t-shirt or a t-shirt that has some sort of something on it and a pair of pajamas, bottoms or sweatpants for me. That's my real casual.
I want to get into the title of the book first. This is the Fire, and you open up with a letter to your nephew, a la James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. Yeah, I love James. I have a whole row devoted to him on my shelf because he's my favorite author. And I want to ask, what is it about Baldwin that you love so much? And also, what inspired you to be like, you know what I want to do? Have my book be sort of like my Fire Next Time.
What is it about? Are you really asking me that question? I mean, what about James Baldwin is not to love? I mean, James Baldwin has been like the Black revolutionary author or literary presence for Black people forever, right? And not just for Black people, but for intellectuals and for people who believe in justice and the truth about America. And there are even conservatives who agree, staunch conservatives who agree with much of what James Baldwin writes because he's telling the truth about Black people and our relationship to this country and our relationship to our fellow countrymen. And so James Baldwin, I picked up the first book I read by him, by the way, was Giovanni's Room, which I'm sure you've read, which he writes about being a gay man. And if you didn't know, you would, if you didn't know anything about the author, you would think he was like some English, waspy white guy writing about a gay love affair. And then there's this black man, American man from Harlem, who's writing about this love story among this, sort of interracial couple in France. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So that was the first book. And then after I read that, I read The Fire Next Time, and I fell in love with James Baldwin. And I read his entire canon, like within months after that. So after the George Floyd incident and the protests of the summer, I had to do something. And I had been reading James Baldwin. I read The Fire Next Time a couple times a year. I've been reading it since my freshman year in college, in my early 20s. And I just felt like I had something to say and I had to do something. And I couldn't be with my family. Usually my family comes to visit me for the summer, the entire family, including my great nephews and my nieces and my mom and my brother-in-law and my sister and everyone. And I couldn't be with them and I couldn't love them. And I was feeling guilty about the world that I had created and that my great nephews was going to inherit. And so because I couldn't be with them, you can't call a 14-year-old up and say, I love you so much. Or they're like, ew, Uncle Don, what the hell, man? And so I put it in this letter to them about how beautiful I thought he was and how I hoped that he would embrace his beauty and his blackness with an ease that I was not able to do, and that he would love himself, that he would learn to love himself a lot earlier than I learned to love myself. And that was the genesis of the book, much as James Baldwin did to his nephew with the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation when he wrote that letter in The Fire Next Time to his nephew.
I also just want to say about James Baldwin that he is routinely called witty, but on occasion he was extremely funny too. And I want to say in particular, after Norman Mailer wrote something about how James Baldwin could never walk through the world the same way as he does, James Baldwin responded, I couldn't walk through the world the same way as you do because I do not have your shoulders. Which let's get into the origins of our current Shade universe right here. There he is. But to me, reading this book, I'm actually surprised at how much of it had to have been written in the past year, which strikes me as a very stressful writing process. How was it stressful to write?
It was stressful to finally say, okay, I'm going to do this, because I wrote a book that released in 2011. It was such a personal thing. In the book, I wrote like 1 or 2 pages about coming out, and that was a whole thing. Don Lemon comes out, and for gay people, they were like, "Where have y'all been?" Like, of course he's gay.
Transparent, which is very difficult to find.
Oh, it is. But guess what? Okay, my baby empire. I bought the rights back. I own my stuff now. Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
wow.
You own your masters.
I own my masters.
Like Amy Mann over here.
So you will be able to find Transparent again, which I think is good. I think people should read it. But it was so personal and so difficult. And I don't know if you guys have ever written a book, but it's the process of writing a book is really tough. But I think even harder is also the promotion of the book, because you have to keep it in people's consciousness, especially now. When we have such short attention spans. And so Don Lemon has a book, and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, Meghan Markle interview, oh my gosh, Oprah did this, and so we're like on to the next thing. And so the promotion is really hard. But yes, the book poured out of me, but the whole process of doing it is longer and more difficult than you think. It's because you have to write it, and then you have to give it to editors, and you have to give it to the collaborator, and everyone has to go over it. And then you have to make sure you get on people's lists for promotion, and that you're on track with whatever is happening in the book world, and blah, 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 blah. And we knew that it was going to be a short process. So I started like in September, October, and we were done with the bulk of the book by November or December. Mm-hmm. It was fast.
So I would say one difference between this and Baldwin's book is
that Baldwin is a much better writer. I'm not trying to be
Baldwin,
but there's only one Baldwin. This is
a
tribute. This is a tribute to Baldwin. This is me paying my respects to Baldwin. It's not me trying to be Baldwin at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, because it's also, this is the fire. What I say to my friends about racism. Do you find that you're often having convos about race with the people in your lives?
I'm having conversations about race with the people in my life. And usually, on a regular basis, as you know, as a man of color, you usually have those with like-minded people, and those are usually people of color. There are some white people who you have those conversations with. I have it, of course, I'm in an interracial relationship, so I have it. But it really should have been, what do I say to my friends about white people? Larry Wilmore and I were having a conversation. He goes, I think you left out a word. And immediately I knew exactly what he was saying. Because when George Floyd happened, I got so many calls from people, hey, Don, help me out. What do I do? And they were quite sincere. I don't know what to say to my kids about this. I don't want my kids to grow up in a world like this. I don't have the vocabulary to be able to have this conversation with my kids. I don't have the tools to be able to talk to anyone about this. I'm quite frankly afraid of people thinking that I'm racist or biased, and I'm not. And it's like, okay, calm down. Or, just I don't know what to do. I feel like I've let down my Black friends, or I have not been a close enough ally, and on and on and on and on. So that was part of the reason I wrote this, is because I got a lot of texts, a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls, a lot of DMs and whatever. And so I said, well, why don't I put this down in writing? And the main part of the book is about accountability, though, and about being able to broach these tough conversations, but beyond broaching the tough conversations, doing the work as well.
I actually want to ask about that one moment you just mentioned, sort of maybe a feeling that you had let down some Black friends. What's interesting about, we're excited to have you here because I feel like one of our first episodes of the podcast in 2018 was when there was sort of a public consciousness that you had shifted into, you called Donald Trump a racist. You're talking about race a lot more on CNN. And I feel like, prior to that, social media was not on Don Lemon's side all the time. But then there was a shift where now people are like, oh, look at Don speaking from the heart. And I would love to know, was that a conscious decision for you to sort of embrace maybe who you felt you'd always been, or maybe you had some moment where you're like, you know what, I just need to be more real on television than I've been for other people before, because that's a contrast with, you holding up the sign with the N-word on CNN.
I love that moment.
You love that moment?
Yeah, let me tell you, listen, I've always spoken about race on CNN. I've always spoken about what's going on. I've never been afraid to tackle race. But I also think that I don't think that social media gave me a fair shake, because I think people get on and someone wants to be snarky, and then another person is snarky, and another person that's, he's this. What I was trying to do is get people to open up and have a discussion about it. The reason I did the N-word sign, which I still don't get why people don't understand, is because the president, who was Black, said the actual word out loud in an interview. As we were having the discussion about removing the Confederate flag from state houses around the country. That's what was in the news. And I said, there are two things that are in the news right now that are insulting to a lot of people, or offending, that is offensive to a lot of people. This flag and this word. And everybody lost their mind. I'm like, why are you losing your mind about this word? The president actually said it, but you didn't yell at him for saying it, but you yell at me for holding it up as a journalist on television while we're while we're in the middle of a discussion about what we do with this word and what we do with this flag. That is what I'm supposed to do as a journalist.
I would say maybe it was also the juxtaposition of the wording of which is worse, the N-word or cracker. And there was one of the words.
No, that was 2 years before.
Oh, 2 years
I
before.
had done that 2 years before, and no one said a word. I did a special on the N-word. No one had done that. No journalist, Black, white, anyone. And my boss said, will you do a special on the N-word? And I said, of course I will. It's going to be controversial. I did an entire hour on the N-word that advertisers were, I'm sure, afraid of and did not want to sponsor. But yet we as CNN did it. And in the promotion of that and in shooting it, I held up cards that said cracker, nigger, on all kinds, I can't, whatever words, whatever racist or racial epithets. And I held all those words up and showed them. Nobody complained. And I said, and at the end of the day, the whole point of it was like, there is a power in the N-word that no other word in the English or any other language holds that power. And so I can hold up all these words, but the moment I hold up this word, people feel a certain kind of way about it. And so that's what that was about. But that was 2 years before, and no one said a word. People were like, oh my God, I love that Don Lemon did the N-word special. I love that he's bringing light to the N-word. And then as a journalist, when I said it on television, when I said, I don't think journalists should say N-word, because if you're doing a story and someone is actually calling someone that word, they're not saying, hey, N-word. Mm-hmm. Or if I am reporting about a court case where someone used the N-word and then they got into a confrontation, the person didn't say N-word. They said the actual word. And I believe for a journalist not saying it is sanitizing it. I think people should hear and feel the power of that word because it's so offensive. It offends the ears and offends the intellect. And so that's how I feel about it. But no one gets mad, or I guess some people do, when people bastardize it in music. When they're just like, hey, whatever, they're just singing. I'm like, well, why don't you get mad at the rapper? What is the reason for him to say it? If you think it's a legitimate enough reason for people to use it in music, then shouldn't a journalist who's actually reporting on what's happening, the truth about what's happening, and giving accurate information about what's happening, shouldn't a journalist be able to use that word?
I think maybe the argument is also that if Nicki Minaj is saying nigga, she uses it in her regular life, and I think there's the difference in, a journalist not being completely familiar with the word. I mean, I guess that's the argument for more black journalists, because maybe then they can actually say the word and report
I say it on TV, you know that.
Yeah, I know you do. Listen,
I pick my moments. By the way, I love your nails, but anyways, go on.
Thank you. No, I upset my high school class at the all-boys Catholic high school that I went to that was all white. Whenever we would read Tom Sawyer, I said nigger out loud, and I remember a classmate was like, I wish that Ira didn't say the word out loud when we're reading it. And I said, I'm going to say whatever I want to. Right. So I get it.
But I also want to say to that is that the thing that really sort of hurt me about that is that I think that as the people who were upset by that, and a lot of them were African Americans, is that they were limiting journalists, especially young black journalists, as to how what they could do. And they were putting on me restrictions and a different set of rules than they do for white journalists. And I think that black journalists should have the freedom to be and do just as much as their black or white or Asian or whatever counterpart, because I understand that we have different standards and that people look at me differently than they look at a Wolf Blitzer or a Jake Tapper or an Anderson, what have you, because they feel I have a certain responsibility to the community. I understand that. But I don't want to hinder young black journalists to think that they have to somehow moderate themselves in order to fit in a certain way with the culture or they should be free to be journalists with just as much freedom as any other person in the world. And I was upset. I thought that especially the National Association of Black Journalists did not understand that, and they were inhibiting young black journalists from just being free, from being emancipated, being able to be the journalist, whatever journalist they wanted to be.
I wanted to talk about how on the news, specifically within the Trump era, let's say Trump said something completely offensive and, any of his memorable phrases he shouted off in the past 4 years. And then it was maybe a CNN's journalist to respond to it. And routinely they would say something like, wow, Trump just said something extraordinary, as opposed to calling it racist, etc. Are there versions of reporting on Trump that you are annoyed with, that gave him too much cover, do you think?
Yeah, I think we gave him a pass for far too long. Immediately, I did not give him a pass. I know people think like, oh, you gave him a lot. I interviewed him and I asked him, I said, people think you're racist. Are you a racist? I was one of the first people he used that line on. Are you racist?
I am the least racist person that you have ever met.
Maybe one of the first journalists. I know he said it to other people before. I am the least racist person. And I said, are you racist? Are you bigoted? Are you, I asked him if he was homophobic. I asked him if he was, I don't know if I said anti-Semitic. I did ask him, are you Islamophobic? All of those things, because that was the word on the street about him, and not necessarily word on the street. The reason I was asking him is because of the birther movement and because of the Central Park, the Exonerated Five. his actions on both of those things were very racist. And I wanted him to explain himself. Now, this goes back to my whole idea about giving Black journalists freedom to be the journalists that they should be. Because I was the only one as a journalist who was taking the heat and saying that he's racist, or calling out his people who came on the air and tried to make excuses for his racism. I would say, I'm not having that person on because they're lying. I'm not having that person on because they're obfuscating. I'm not having that person on because what they're saying and doing is racist. And that was hard to do in the beginning because nobody was doing that. And I wasn't sure that I was going to have the support of my bosses. Luckily, I did. And they said, that's how you feel as a journalist. This is your show. Say your piece. And so, after the whole, the first one to call him a liar. It was tough to say the president of the United States is a liar. And I said, he's a liar. And people were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you called the president a liar. I'm like, well, he's lying. What else am I going to call him? And so after the whole shitholes comment, I just had enough. And I opened my show and said, look, the president of the United States is racist. Sorry, point blank, racist. And that was, I think, a turning point for a lot of journalists.
An interesting thing that was in your book, sort of off of that too, is you have a passage about your sister's passing. And you talked about how even people who you vehemently disagree with, like a Sean Hannity and like a Megyn Kelly reached out to you to offer their condolences. And I was just interested in the moment where you're like, you can call, say, Donald Trump is racist. How should we be talking about journalists who work for, say, a Fox News, where it's, sure, they're journalists and some of them are doing their job, but how do we as normal people who want to discuss the media talk about people who work at a place that props up racism?
You say that.
And how, yeah.
You say that. You say that about them. I say that about them. Look, I'm in a different position than you are. You can say that.
Absolutely.
I don't like to give people like that the spotlight, and I don't like to give them to elevate them any more than needs to be. If any of those people, if Sean Hannity wants to say something or whatever, he's got a platform, he can do it. Whatever, I don't like to play that media gotcha game, but in this especially environment, there are things that people are doing that are dangerous to not only the country or the republic, but to their fellow man, as we saw with the insurrection. When you fill people's heads full of lies, then they act upon those lies, and they act with, they think that they're telling the truth. So they're like, hey, they act out of righteousness when they're totally wrong. And so I think you just say it. I think you're free to be able to discuss those people and say it, whatever it is that you want to say about them. But there are others who use Black people as a foil to capitalize on their success and on their careers. And I don't like to give those people shine, because you know what they want? They want Don Lemon to say their name. They want Don Lemon to discuss them so that they can say, see? And then the Twitter thing starts and the social media thing starts. And then it becomes a whole thing about, yeah, that liberal hack, Don Lemon, that race baiting, whatever. And it's like, I'm not even going to engage you on that level, because that is what you want, because you are not relevant and you're looking for me to give you a degree of relevance. Guess what? Have a seat, go away. I'm not interested. But you can, you're free to do that. And I would encourage you to do it. And when
we do.
And I think when there's time for me to do it, there's a time and a place, I'll do it. But I choose my battles with those, because those people are looking for that from me.
Of course, Megan's looking for a platform.
Okay, now I don't even need to say it, and you know what I'm talking about.
One thing I wanted to ask before.
But why is that? But why is that always people who have nothing to do with Black culture, who have no understanding of what it's like to be a minority or a marginalized person in this country? Why do they always run to social media to criticize issues, Black issues, marginalized people's issues, to try to gain some sort of relevance? What does that say about them? Why would you do that? Because there's so many positive ways to engage on these issues, coming from a position of understanding right? And if you do believe in family values, of true family values, why do you choose to engage in that way on that level, and particularly on these issues? It says a lot about you, doesn't it?
Yeah. One last thing I want to bring up is your book also brings up a lot of the rhetoric from the past year with the protests, about defund the police. And I want to ask specifically about these two sentences, because to me they sort of seem to contradict one another. When you say that defund the police is not a productive thing to say, it promotes a startled knee-jerk response, potentially alienating people who might have been allies, and implies an unrealistic snap of the fingers, simplicity for those who are willing to fight for change but can't stomach the long haul. But then also later in that chapter, you say, Black people have been told to go slow as they push for change, but how much more slowly could we have gone, and what has been the reward for the virtue of patience? So where is, if we've been going too slowly and we want change now, then how is a phrase that cuts straight to the heart, like defund the police, too much in that moment, I guess?
I don't really see how those two are contradictory, because you're talking about a slogan and you don't have to use that slogan in order to do it. The reality is that it's a terrible slogan. If you read today, there's an article in, I think it's Politico, about how about the argument and the conversation that's going on with Democrats and progressives about defund the police, especially when it comes to the midterms, and how it actually, I know people didn't believe that it hurt them in 2020. It really did hurt them, and it potentially will hurt them in 2022, because you never want to give your enemies ammo. You always want to be strategic. And I know that people want to go 100 all the time and say, oh my God, it's time and we must do this. Of course, my patience is out and it's running thin, but also within that patience, and within my 55 years on this earth, I have a wisdom that some young people don't have, because they want to go 100 all the time, which is fine. I respect that. And if you know about the events of last summer, I said the young people have it. The older folks, the establishment, need to get on board. We need to respect them. We need to show their support. We're not doing enough of that. We're quietly saying things and not doing enough. But I don't think that is a popular slogan. Defund the police is a slogan that is not productive, because when you say it, even your allies here get rid of the police, take the police money away, take the police off the street. And no one wants that. As someone who lives in Harlem, as someone who lives in a neighborhood where we need the police, I don't want to defund them. I want to make them better. I want to take the money and allocate and put it in better places, but that does not mean defunding the police. Now, if you want to reimagine policing in this country, which I am 100% in agreement on, that not all police need to go on issues that go on calls that have to do with mental health issues or with certain kind of domestic issues. We need mental health workers and all of that. But I don't want police defunded. And trust me, and I think especially the progressives and the young people that are out there, when you hear from Democratic people who are running for office that the defund the police slogan hurt us, you need to think about it. Because why are you giving your enemies ammo? Why are you helping your opponent? Because if you want to get something done, fine, have some passion about getting it done, but be strategic and smart about what you're doing. And slogans matter. Jon Lewis will tell you the same thing when he was here. There were issues of slogans that came up during the civil rights movement, and they would say, okay, we can do that. We can't do this because this is going to bounce off instead of being absorbed. Defund the police bounces off of everyone except for the people who are stubborn about it and don't want to hear that it is a terrible, awful slogan. The idea behind it is a good idea. The slogan is bad. That's an easy fix. Get rid of the slogan. Come up with something else. And stop putting so many apples into a slogan. Okay, it's fine. The slogan is bad. We get it. Get rid of it and fight for all the other issues. Come up with another name. That's not so hard to do. That's called compromise. That's called strategy. That's called being smart. That's called being wise. That's called getting your issues done and handled without getting stopped at a roadblock that means nothing. It means nothing in the long run. Prioritize. Sorry.
No, I'm interested in this conversation because as somebody who was deeply uneducated about policing up until last year, ignorantly so, to me, that phrase did crystallize something for me. It puts together a whole bunch of loose ends I didn't understand before. So I don't find it to be useless either.
I didn't say it was useless. I just don't think it's productive in this moment. I think it was very useful in starting a conversation. But I don't think that, but I think that if you want, here's what you have to remember. Politics is about winning. If something is causing you to lose in politics, you got to get rid of it. You want to win. The thing that you have to remember is like, you don't want to win an argument. You want to win the office.
Oh, we absolutely agree on that. I think there's been a long history of protest, and defund the police didn't even come from this past year. It's like it inspired me and a lot of other people to even investigate and read up on the police abolitionist movement, which has existed for decades. That's all I will say.
Okay. Again, if you're explaining in politics, you're losing. And sometimes it's just as simple as build that wall. And so if you can understand how powerful the slogan "Build That Wall" was for conservatives and people who cared about the border, then you should understand the power in defund the police as well. That a slogan can have a positive power, and that it can encourage people to go to vote because of it. Then it has the power as well to discourage people to go and vote because of it, to not vote because of it. It's the opposite can be justice. It can be just as detrimental to your cause as it can be positive to your cause.
I want to add also that I think in particular liberals are used to like the minorest, strangest things completely alienating the other side, that it feels not prudent to be utterly, I don't want to say mindful, but to water everything down because they'll always find something alienating.
Yeah, that's true. They'll always find something alienating. There are certain things that rise to a certain level in this culture that really, that people are passionate about. And I think policing is one of them. So if you want to accomplish, again, I'll say it again, if you want to accomplish what you need to accomplish with policing in this country, then you have to be smart and strategic, not only about what you want, but in your messaging as well. And messaging, as we know, is really important when it comes to politics. All you have to do is, and look, that's how simple Donald Trump was. Wasn't smart. It was smart in a sense, but they weren't the sophisticated plans with nuance. It was easy slogans. Build a wall, right? Make America great again. Boom. Simple. You may not agree with it, may piss you off, but it was just that simple. When you say defund the police and everybody goes, "Ah!" and then you're having to explain what it means, you've lost.
Well,
anyway.
Yes. Thank you for being here, Don. I mean, there's so many things that we could have talked about, but
I know, but I love these kind of conversations. So we can completely disagree. But as I say, it doesn't mean that we hate each other.